Welcome back. So in the last two lectures we created our form and our Datepicker skeleton, and in today's lecture we are going to introduce some functionalities such as showing and hiding Datepicker. So we start off by hiding what we've been building. So we worked really hard to make it look good, and in this lecture we are just going to hide it away. We're going to grab the Datepicker itself and just give it a property of display none. Right, it's gone, and we're going to create a utility class, and by toggling that class we'll be able to show and hide. We're going to set it to display block, and we're going to add an important statement as well to make sure that it's actually applied properly. Now what we need to do is create a new file, the app.js, and we're going to import it here. We're going to say app.js, right, and let's just test that it's all working properly. Just gonna console log hello, forward to save it. Hello is there. Okay, so where should we start? Let's add an event listener to show, and the time we want to show the Datepicker is when the input field comes into focus or when someone clicks on it. But before we go ahead, I would actually like to move this Datepicker inside the form group. Now it's going to open up. Well, we just close it back so it's a bit more manageable in HTML file, and I'm going to rename this from myDate to from, and the ID from myDate to from. We have not used these in the style CSS, so it shouldn't affect anything at all. And I'm going to grab this form group and just duplicate it here and close the Datepicker to make it more visible, and let's rename the from to 2. So we're gonna have 2 Datepickers, and the Datepicker is gonna get an ID as well. So here you're just gonna say ID Datepicker, and this will be from, and we copy this over to, let me close this again, and copy over this here, and we're going to call it 2, obviously. Now we have 2. We need to modify the label, select the to date, so it will make more sense for our user. Right, so let's just go ahead and start working on the from. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add an event listener. This is how we do it: document query selector, and here we can just add the selector, and what we are targeting is the from input element for now. So this is an ID, and add an event listener, and the event we'll be listening to is a focus. And we're going to use an arrow function as a callback. And what we want to do here is grab the Datepicker. So document query selector, and it's called the Datepicker from. We're going to access the class list property, and this gives access to the add method. And we're going to add, what did I call this utility class? UDivShow. So we're just going to add it like that without the dot. We don't need, because we're talking about classes anyway. Let's see. So as soon as it comes into focus, it opens up. Obviously you can't close it now, but at least opens up. Now we don't want it to jump further down when we open it. So the date picker is going to be positioned look, it's going to make me type out the whole word, and it looks better now. Right. Now we also want to hide it. We could program a little X icon just for closing it, or more conveniently, simply when user clicks outside, for example, on the container, then it should disappear. So why don't we just grab that container? So I'm just gonna copy all the way here to the event listener. Actually, let me copy the whole thing. I'm not a big fan of too much typing. We're going to target the container, and the event we're going to listen here is the click event, and we're going to target the Datepicker from. We would need access to the class list, and instead of adding, we're going to remove this class. Let's save it and see how it works. So as you can see, it does show up for 1 second, or even just a fraction of a second, but after that it disappears. Now if you use the tab key to highlight, then it stays on. So what exactly is happening here? So what's happening here is called the event propagation. So as you can see, what happens is that when an element in the DOM tree is clicked upon, for example, what happens is with the event it bubbles up. So we have the input element that's been clicked, and the input element is on the form group div. So when the input is clicked, it's going to say I have been clicked, but then the event bubbles further and the form group is going to say I have been clicked as well. Now the form group doesn't just exist on its own, it exists in the form. So the form will say I have been clicked as well, and then it bubbles even further and the container is going to say I have been clicked as well. And what did we just add here? It's basically that when the container is clicked, it should remove the UDivShow class. So when you click it, you get an open call, and you get a closing call as well. When you just highlight it with the tab, with the focus, we don't have a focus for the container, so it stays open. So what do we need to do? What we need to do is, so stop the event to propagate further up on the DOM tree. So we also need to create a click listener for the from input field. This time we're going to listen for the click event, and this callback function we have here gets passed automatically an event parameter, and on the event parameter we can call a method called stop propagation, and that will stop the event bubbling. So the click will only be executed on the actual input field. So now if we save it and click on it, you'll see that it stays here. Now what happens if we try to click a number? Disappears. Or what if we try to click a drop down to select anything? You will see that it will still, the event is still bubbling up because we only stopped it on the input. So we need to go ahead and stop the event bubbling on the Datepicker itself. So we will need a very similar event listener here. We need to tag it the Datepicker from, which is the ID of the Datepicker, right? So this one here that I closed, minimized. So if we click on it, we will not allow any event to further bubble up. So now you can basically click anywhere and the Datepicker won't disappear unless you click outside of it. Now if you click here on the label, this is part of the label if you look at it. So the label, we connected it with the for and ID property. So clicking on the input or clicking on the label is the same. So it won't allow the event to bubble up. So if you click on this line where the label is, you won't be able to close the Datepicker. But if you click the plain container, Datepicker should disappear. Right. As a next step, why don't we go ahead and remove these hard-coded years and actually populate it dynamically. So let's just go into the HTML, open up our Datepicker and scroll down where we have our options. It's a little bit hard to see, but it's this one here. So I just hit Control C and that will comment it out. And if I come back here, yeah, our year drop down is empty on the from Datepicker. So what you can do here, let's move these event listeners down. Let's create a variable for the from Datepicker and call it from start date, and it's going to be a string. Let's make it 2018 November 30th, and we will also need an end date, so we're just changing this here, end date, and let's make it a little bit in the future, 2021 March 31st, right? It's got 31 days. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to count the years between 2018 and 2021 and simply output them inside select element as options. So we're going to extract these numbers here. So we're saying creating new constants from start year, and this will be equal to from start date, substring, so we're extracting this string from index 0 and we're going 4 characters just to get the years. Now this will return a string. If you'd console log it, you would see that it's a string. So you need to pass it as an integer. Which we can do very easily just by adding a plus sign here. Now you see that it's, instead of black, it's a blue. So now we have an integer that we can use for counting. Now we need an end year as well. It should be very plain and simple. And again, we just need the same characters. And now we need a loop, where a very basic loop where we go from the start year and end up at the end year. So we're going to say the I should be equal to from start year. We're going to go up until and including the from end year. And we're incrementing by 1 each time. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to create an HTML element. I'm going to call it just option. The way we create an HTML element is on the document we're calling create, this one here, create element, and we're looking for the option tag. Now this will be an object, and it has a number of properties, including, sorry, that's not what I was going to say. So the option has the value. So very similarly here, like we've given the value, and the other property is the text, which basically goes inside the content area. So the value will be equal to I as we iterate through these years, and the option text will also be I. And all that's left is to grab this pick year select element. So we do that by document object again, query selector, and we not only need the pick year, because now we have 2 pick years, we have also in the 2, so we need to specify that we want it to be as part of the Datepicker from. I think I have, yeah, I've got too many hashes. So what we targeting is Datepicker from Datepicker, and inside that the pick year select HTML element, and append child, and we're just grabbing our option variable here. And if we save it, when I open this, we should have our dates right here. Now if I were to change this to 1985 and this to 2043, here we go, we got all the years here. Now let's revert back to where we've been, and this pretty much takes care of one input element and one date picker. Now if we use this method, this what is called like procedural line by line coding, where I explicitly have to come up with my variables and repeat this process as many times as many inputs I have. You can imagine that it's quite a painstaking process, and it's not very scalable. Imagine we had an app where people can put in their job history, and they would have to put in different workplaces when they started, when they finished for the last 15 years. Maybe we would even enable them to create an extra entry. So imagine you would end up 15, 20 different date pickers, different input fields. So it's not very scalable to have to do this all the time. And if it's dynamic, there's no programmer that would come in and come up with these variables and come up with these loops to populate the relevant date picker year options, year selections. So you can see that this approach, this procedural approach, is not very scalable. And this is why it's a good idea to switch to an object-oriented paradigm, because right now it's not just that we have to define these variables, but we also have to tell JavaScript how to handle them, what to do with them. There's no blueprint, there's no concept in JavaScript for plain variables, whereas when you use objects have blueprints or prototypes, so to say. And every time you say like, okay, I'm going to create this blueprint, and this blueprint will have the property of start date and end date. And every time you get a value into this start date, always on every instance of that object, do the exact same thing with that variable. So make sure that when I create a new calendar or a date picker, and the start date gets a value, let's say 1985 or 2001, whichever, make sure the calendar always starts there. Right now I would have to go in and code it all line by line myself. So this is why we will not continue on this path down. So what we're going to do in the next lesson is convert this code into ES6 classes. So by the end of the next lesson, you will see that we're going to get to a point where the only thing you'll need to do is create a new input field with a new ID. And by highlighting that input field, a new unique date picker will be created without us having to write any line of JavaScript code. So that's coming in the next lesson.